welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria, and today's video is just going to be a bit of a book recommendations video, and I'm basically going to be giving you recommendations based on books you may have enjoyed before. So if you like this book, you may like this book. So I've got a few different books here to try. Most of them are pretty popular books that you probably will have heard of even if you haven't read them yet. But yeah, hopefully be giving you a few suggestions in here that you may not have heard of or that are a bit less known, and hopefully give you a good few options to be adding to that TBR as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get into the recommendations. So the first book I'm going to give you some recommendations on is Crescent City, so specifically Crescent City 1, House of Earth and Blood. So this one is an urban fantasy. If you've read it, you'll know that it's basically following Bryce, who's our main character. And basically at the start of the story, Bryce witnesses the murder of her best friends, and it kind of sends her into oblivion for the next couple of years. She's kind of a party girl, an it girl on the scene, and she's basically just doing anything to give her a distraction from what happened. 2 years later, the murderer attacks again, and basically an archangel called Hunt Aflar is assigned to try and solve the case, and Bryce is actually a suspect because of her closeness with the initial victims, and the story kind of goes from there. But really with this one, it's very much an urban fantasy with hidden magical elements, mystery involved in the background there, ragtag group of people coming together to try and solve that mystery. So those are the type of vibes that I'm going to be recommending the next few books on. And the first one that I have is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. Now this one again is an urban fantasy. It's following our main character Karu, who is a blue-haired art student in Prague. She does also have a kind of secondary job as a errand girl for a monster, and basically she's kind of just living her life going along, and then there's some strange happenings within Prague that are making her question some things. She's then faced with an archangel called Akiva, and that kind of turns her world into turmoil. It pushes her to kind of ask questions about her origins and these monsters that she's working with, and this one was just a really good one for anyone who likes quite lyrical writing. Laini Taylor's writing is quite lyrical. There is quite a lot of heartache in here as well, and similar to Crescent City, she really puts her characters through it. So if you enjoy that, for want of a better term, this is going to be a really good series for you. There's 3 books in this series as well. I've read all 3 and absolutely loved them. So yeah, this is the first recommendation. If you did like Crescent City, I do think you'll like this one as well, because it has quite a lot of those same elements. It has a beautifully constructed ethereal fantasy world. It has star-crossed lovers with mysterious pasts, themes of, you know, your identity, where you belong, and the price of secrets. And again, that's all the same kind of vibes that you get with Crescent City. So yeah, I definitely think these are comparable, and this is one that I think may have had its day back when it was first released, but definitely still deserves to get the same amount of hype as something like Crescent City. So if you haven't read this one yet, definitely pick it up. The next one I'm recommending is the Shadowhunter series, and especially this one, so City of Bones. This is part of the Mortal Instruments series within that Shadowhunter world. So this is again an urban fantasy. It's set in a more modern world. There's technology and things like that. This first book follows Clary Frey, who is a normal human as far as she knows, following her life until one day she witnesses a murder by 3 mysterious beings, and it kind of throws her life into turmoil. And again, this is kind of a story about secret powers, secret histories, magical powers that someone may have, kind of familial identity that may be uncovered within this. And again, within this, in the plot, there's usually an overarching kind of murder mystery or a mystery to solve. And again, it just gives those same vibes as I got when I was reading Crescent City. You're kind of following along with the characters while they try and solve this mystery. So yeah, definitely think this one would be, again, a good comparison for that. The next 2 are more so just because they're an urban fantasy setting rather than there being kind of a link to the plot or kind of the themes within there. It is more so just because they're kind of a urban setting. They have a bit of romance in there. There is a magical element in there, but when it comes to plot, they're not quite as similar. But I do still think if you like the vibes of Crescent City, you'll probably like these as well. So the first one is The Book of Azrael by Amber V. Nicole. This one we follow our main character Diana, who has been working for Caden, who is a demon, for the last however many years, basically as part of a pact that she made with him to save her sister Diana, who was dying at the time. Now, working for Caden, she does tend to get herself into some kind of morally grey situations, and one of the assignments that he gives her is to try and find this artifact, the Book of Azrael, which leads her into the path of Samkiel, who is basically a god also known as the World Ender. Now Samkiel has been kind of hiding from everything for the last few centuries, denying his crown and his people, but after an attack on the people that he loves, he decides to come out of hiding and to try and protect them, and it converges basically Diana and his paths as they're both looking for this Book of Azrael. This is a true enemies to lovers story. There's definitely a lot of angst in here. It's very slow burn in this first one as well, but you definitely get that kind of ragtag found family element within this one. There is quite a good fantastical element in here as well, with again secret histories and secret abilities that may come to the forefront as well. But yeah, it's a really good series so far. I've only read the first 2 books in this one, but so far I really loved it, so again would highly recommend this one. And then the last one is Legendborn by Tracy Dion. Now this one, again, it doesn't really have too many ties to Crescent City, other than there being maybe some mysterious familial bonds and histories there. This one we're following our main character Brie Matthews, who recently has lost her mother in a car accident, and she's looking for an escape, and she decides to sign up to a program for really gifted students at a local college. But her first night there, she witnesses a magical attack, and it kind of again just throws her life into chaos. She ends up discovering this secret society called the Legendborn, who are basically tasked with hunting these creatures down who committed the magical attack. And again, it just kind of leads her down a path of questions about her own history, her own familial bonds, and maybe some secret power that there may be to unfold. So yeah, this one I do think doesn't get as much hype as it definitely should. There's a lot of King Arthur folklore in here, and I just thought the story was really good. Again, there's only 2 books out in this series so far, and the third one I think isn't coming out until 2026, but the first 2 books that I've read were really, really good. The second book does end on a cliffhanger, and it's been killing me not knowing what happens, but really love the writing in this, really love the story, and definitely think it's one that deserves a bit more hype. So next up we have A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas again, and if you enjoyed this one, I have a few options here that I think you would also enjoy. Again, may not be that the plots are quite similar, but it's more so the vibes that you get with this one. So this one is definitely more of a romantasy in my opinion. The romance is very forward in terms of the plot. However, there is a background of some political intrigue in there that would kind of hold a good bit of the story if it was on its own, but for me the romance is really what heals in this one, so that's kind of what I'm looking towards when I'm looking at these other options. If you don't know what this one is about, it's basically about a human girl who is hunting in the forest one day and mistakenly kills a fae while he is in his wolf form. And basically the Lord of the Spring Court, who he healed from, comes to take Feyre, who is the main character in this, back to his lands as the price paid for his friend's life. And it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Feyre is taken off to this other land, and she's kind of making discoveries about this land as she goes along. She starts to develop feelings maybe for her captor, and yeah, as I say, the romance in here is kind of at the forefront, but there is quite a lot of political intrigue that does unfold within the series. So the first one I do want to suggest is the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, and the reason I kind of think this is a similar premise is that within this first book you do have kind of a plot where you can kind of think you understand where it's going to go, but as the series progressed it definitely just delved into something that was much bigger than you really thought it could be from that first book. And again with this one we do have someone who maybe at the start is a little bit mistreated and needs to kind of fight to make their way in the world, and this one is a King Midas retelling, so quite loosely based on the King Midas folklore, and we follow our main character Oren, who is basically King Midas's concubine or one of his women, and she is the favoured, so is completely covered in gold and is kind of ostracised by the other people within the castle. King Midas basically saved her from the streets and saved her from despair and desperation. However, when war is about to break out, she becomes the pinnacle point of a deal that is struck between Midas and another kingdom, and everything that she knows is about to change forever. And again, I always kind of mention with this first book, it's almost like a prequel to where the series will go. I personally struggled a little bit with the first book within this series, but as the series went on I really started to love it, and it is one of my top favourite series now. But the first book, as I say, does have kind of a similar theme in that it's almost like a prequel to what the real story will be, and I definitely felt that that was the way that ACOTAR feels once you've read the whole series. But definitely really enjoy this one for the romance that ends up developing as the series goes on. Again, you've got kind of a girl who ends up discovering a whole new world around her own familial history and just the magic that may be around her within a world that she didn't know. And yeah, as I say, just the romance in this one is definitely what carried it for me, I think, along the way, as well as some of the side characters and that found family. So I think if you did like ACOTAR, this is one that you will enjoy as well. The next one I want to recommend is Spark of the Everflame, and basically this is part of the Kindred's Curse saga, and it's by Penn Cole. And this one I do think it is more of that romantasy feel, even though there is a lot of political intrigue in here as well. There is definitely a great amount of romance in here to keep you intrigued if that's more what you're looking for. And in this first one we follow DM, who is basically a healer within this land. Her mother was also a healer, but she has been missing for the last 6 months, and as part of DM's mission to try and find her mother, she takes her mother's position as the healer within the palace within this land and is tending to the royals as her mother had before. Now within this land the royals are actually what are called descendants, and they are part god and part human. They're kind of fae-like in terms of the description. They aren't called fae, they're called descendants, but they basically have magical powers and are immortal, whereas DM is mortal and lives with kind of the human people within the realm. Now within this realm the humans are kind of treated as lesser than the descendants because they don't have magical power, so there is a rebellion that's in the making within this land, and DM kind of gets caught up within that and trying to decide what her part is going to be within that rebellion. And as part of that she is struggling with her relationship with her childhood friend Henry, who she has had a little bit of a relationship with, but it's kind of struggling in terms of where that's going to go and how that's going to go forward, especially when she meets Prince Luther, who is the crown prince of this land as well. And yeah, this one again, I think the first book kind of really sets up the scene quite well, and as I've read on in the series, it does open up quite a lot from where the first book started. But I definitely think this gave me the same kind of vibes as I got with ACOTAR. It was bingeably readable, and again, you get those found family elements in there as well. So yeah, definitely think if you enjoyed ACOTAR, this is another one that you will enjoy. The next one I want to recommend is A Court That's Cruel and Lovely, and this is by Stasia Stark. And this one we follow our main protagonist Priska, who lives in a land where essentially no one is allowed to have magic, because anyone who is born with magic, it is taken from them to give as a gift to the gods to protect them from the evil fae that there is in this land. And the king is kind of sanctioning this throughout this land to ensure that everyone abides by this rule. Now Priska does actually have magic, and basically if you are a person who still has magic after kind of being a child, or if you've kept your magic throughout your life, you are what is known as the corrupt, and everyone gets tested, I think it's around their 21st birthday, to see if they do have magic, and if you're found to have magic, you're put to death. So it's coming up to that time for Priska, so she decides to run to keep her family safe, because obviously anyone associated with her would also be put to death for knowing that she had this magical power and not kind of reporting her. So she decides to flee and ends up making a bargain with a group of mercenaries who she doesn't really want to deal with. They don't really want to deal with her, but they decide it would be mutually beneficial to team up as they move along. There is of course one of the mercenaries who is broody, keeping secrets, and may intrigue Priska as the story goes along, but I'll leave it at that so as not to spoil anything as it goes on. But yeah, again, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was bingeably readable as well. It was one that I was kind of having a really great time while reading it. It gave me the same vibes as ACOTAR when I was reading through, and it was just a really fun read, a really great romantasy, and one that I haven't seen many people talk about, so definitely think this one is worth checking out. And then the last one, to be honest, it doesn't really have many plot similarities to ACOTAR. It is just one that I think you will enjoy if you like the romance side of ACOTAR, and that is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Now I would say that this series is different in terms of the writing style from ACOTAR, because Jennifer L. Armentrout's writing style is very descriptive, so at times it can feel like it's a little bit slow, or it can feel like you're getting a lot of information that you may not necessarily need. For me personally, I really love the writing style. I do like a descriptive writing style as well, and I've loved the characters enough to keep pushing through with this series, and I do think if you like romantasy, you will enjoy this one as well. So in this one we follow our main protagonist Poppy, who is the maiden within this land, and the maiden has always been brought up to be kind of this chaste and devout representative who will be ascended to ensure the safety of her kingdom. So basically the weight of the world is kind of on Poppy's shoulders, even though she doesn't know what she wants for herself because of her upbringing. She's not really sure what would be out there for her, but basically one day her main guard is killed and she ends up having a new guard called Hawk, and he kind of helps her understand that there may be some things that she doesn't quite understand about the world, and some of the things she may believe to be true may not in fact be correct. So the story kind of goes from there. But again, this one is great if you love romance, if you love found family, if you like anything with those good fantastical elements, kind of mysteries to unfold. I do think this would be a great series to pick up. Now there is also a prequel series to this one, which I think is a great series as well, and I think technically you could read that before. There is a bit of a reading order that you can't follow for this series, and there is quite a lot of books in this one, so it is a bit of a commitment, this series, but I do think if you enjoyed ACOTAR, you probably will enjoy this one as well. So next up is Throne of Glass, which is a series that I absolutely love as well, as you can tell, and one that I think gets quite a lot of hype, and deservedly so, because as I say, it is one of my favourites. But I do think there are quite a lot of series out there that kind of give these same vibes that again I don't really hear a lot of people talking about. But if you don't know what this one's about, we basically follow our main character Selena Sardathian, who has been in a slave encampment for the last year because she was discovered to be Ardalan's assassin, and essentially the king is looking for a new assassin within this land, so the crown prince comes to this slave encampment to get Selena out so that she can compete in these trials to become the king's assassin, and the story really does open up from there. So there's a lot of trials in here, and there's also a bit of a mystery in the background that the characters are trying to solve. Again, we get some found family within this one. So a few series that I think are quite similar to this one would be firstly the Shattered Kingdom series by Angelina J. Stafford. So this is one that I read probably just after I read Throne of Glass. I was really craving something that would give me those same vibes, and a series that came up was this one. So it starts off with the Shattered Kingdoms. So it starts off with Gandrit, who is our main female protagonist, and she has been training in this encampment to be a guardian of what is called Vala, so this goddess Vala, and she has 1 year left within this encampment to complete her training. In comes a beautiful stranger who basically throws Gandrit's fate into chaos, as he basically gives her a choice to either run from this encampment or to work for the man that she believes took her from her family's arms when she was a child. And the story kind of goes from there. I think it's a great character driven adventure with, you know, a ragtag group of people that kind of converge into one storyline. It's full of lovable characters. The main character has loads of secrets about her past, even some that she may not be aware of herself, and these are all kind of uncovered as the series goes along. And I think with this one, the action and the kind of mystery that's shrouded around the story really gets you into that story. But what keeps you there is the characters that you meet along the way. There was quite a few lovable characters within there, and by the end of it, again, you can't quite believe it started where it did, and I feel that way about Throne of Glass as well. So I do think if you really loved Throne of Glass, this is a series that you will enjoy. Next up is The Song of the Marked by S.M. Gaither, and a lot of people do kind of compare this to Throne of Glass, so again, I just thought it was worth mentioning within this comparison because it's not one that I hear a lot of people talking about. And in this one we follow Cassia Greythorn, who is a mercenary within this land, and she only cares about completing her next job and getting enough money basically to afford the medicine that she needs for her mentor, as her mentor has been suffering with an illness that has been plaguing the land for quite some time. Now, when the king of this land asks Cassia to investigate this sickness, she can't resist the massive reward that he is offering, even if it does mean she has to work with Captain Alander, who is, let's just say, not so likeable, quite arrogant, and basically infuriates Cassia along the way. There's reluctant allyship in there. As Cassia and Alander work together, they see that there may be more to this than they first thought, and they do have to work together to try and save the Empire. And this one, I think I've read the first 3 books within this, and I have really enjoyed it so far. I do want to start reading it physically because I think the audiobooks are really good, but I don't think I was fully paying attention when I was reading them via audio, so I am going to reread these physically just to kind of get back into that series again. And it's been quite some time, but I do remember really enjoying this. I did really enjoy the love interest. I think there was a little bit of, not so much insta love, but the relationship did develop a little more quickly than I usually like. But I do think, again, this kind of follows a ragtag group of people who are found family, and the story really does expand as the books go on. So yeah, highly recommend this one if you did enjoy Throne of Glass. Next up is An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir, and in this one we follow Leia, who is a scholar within this world, and essentially they are slaves to the Martial Empire. They are ruling at this time. Leia's brother actually gets captured as part of a rebellion within the Empire, so she's on a mission to try and save him, and along the way she meets Elias, who is a soldier within the Empire, who maybe doesn't really agree with the ideals that they're following and is trying to fight for his freedom. They end up reluctantly allying together to meet their common goal, and the story goes from there. Now, this one is kind of inspired by ancient Rome. We have themes of facing tyranny and dark magic, so again, those are the same that we have in Throne of Glass. It's a complex, harsh world where survival isn't necessarily guaranteed, and there's themes of freedom and resistance and the ability to choose, and again, there is some romance in there along the way, but I would say that that's a bit more of a subplot within this one. And I would also say that Saba Tahir definitely likes to put her characters through it, and we do get that especially in the later books within the Throne of Glass series. So again, there's a lot of parallels there to draw from that series, and yet again, I think I've mentioned this in pretty much every video since I started doing BookTube, but if you haven't read this series, definitely pick it up. The writing in here is superb. I absolutely love Saba Tahir's writing. She's one of my absolutely favourite authors, and I think if you did enjoy Throne of Glass, this is definitely a series you'll enjoy as well. And then lastly is Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent, and in this one we follow Tasana, who has been a slave her whole life, and she's been the captor of the most powerful man in Thrall for most of that time. He did give her a choice to be able to buy her freedom, however when she has enough money to do that, of course he doesn't uphold to his promise, and this leads to her killing him and having to flee Thrall for her own safety. As she was forced to flee, she ends up in the arms of the Orders, who basically are an organisation strong enough to destroy her former masters. They bring her in to try and help her and give her a mentor called Maxentorius Farleone, who is quite reluctant to teach her, as he is quite reclusive and despises the Orders, but he isn't able to turn this down. So the two of them work together to try and help her hone on the magic that she has. Now, there are some dark forces at play in here, so the two may discover as they go along that things aren't quite what they seem, and they may have to change tact as that goes along. But really love this one. Again, there's kind of a theme of overcoming tyranny and gaining your freedom and fighting for those who are in need. But what I loved about this one was definitely the writing style that Carissa Broadbent has. Again, it's quite lyrical, quite beautiful, and she also really puts her characters through it within this series, so you will get some heartache in this one as well. But I think that even though The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which Carissa Broadbent also wrote, has got some hype right now, I hardly ever hear anyone talking about this series, and I really love it. I think I actually might prefer it slightly to that series, so if you love that series as well, definitely check this one out because it's just as beautiful, has a really rich world building, and yeah, it's one of my absolute faves, so definitely worth checking out. So next up is When the Moon Hatched. So if you like this book, I do have a few recommendations for you. But if you haven't heard of this one, we follow our main protagonist Rave, who is an assassin who is basically just supposed to follow orders and get the job done. She's currently working for the rebellion of this land, and one day she ends up getting caught by a rival bounty hunter who's working for the Guild of Nobles, who are basically a group of powerful fae. Then comes in our other main character Khan, who has basically overthrew this Guild of Nobles and finds Rave within the prison there and offers her a chance for her freedom if she will help him uncover a mystery that he has been working on. So this one, I would say it's quite a lyrical story. There is quite a lot of world building in here. I think there's like a 20-page glossary in here for the world building, so it is pretty intense. But the main thing I liked about this was the quite lyrical writing and the writing style, and also kind of the mystery around this. A lot of the time you weren't really too sure what was going on or why anything was important that was being told to you. So I think a few series that would be comparable to this would be, firstly, Strange the Dreamer. So again, this is one that I try and squeeze into every video that I do. But Strange the Dreamer is definitely very lyrical. It's a beautiful writing style that Laini Taylor has. And throughout this story, you are kind of wondering what is going on. For a lot of it, it's not really clicking until you get further and further into the story. So it can be a little bit confusing at times, but it is entertaining as you go along trying to figure that out. Now this one we follow Laszlo Strange, who is a librarian within this land, and he's been obsessed with basically what is called the Lost City of Weep. So a city that used to exist but has now disappeared. He gets a chance to go on an expedition to try and find this city and to research and to discover answers to some of the questions that he may have had about it. And the story kind of goes from there. And again, this one is quite twisty and turny, and there's a lot of mysteries in there that don't quite make sense until you reach maybe like 70 to 80% of this one. But it's just a beautiful writing style, a really great story. It is a duology, so not too much of a commitment in terms of reading a series, but definitely one I think if you like lyrical and beautiful writing styles, that you'll really like this one as well. And very similar to that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This one again is quite confusing as you're reading along. For the most part, you're kind of not sure why anything is relevant or why you're getting told certain details, but by the end of it, it all kind of makes sense a little bit. At the end, it is left a little bit open to interpretation, but again, for me, this one was just a beautiful read in terms of the language and the writing that was in here. Very lyrical, very poetic, but also pretty fast paced as well, so it definitely kept me intrigued the whole way through. Now in this one we follow Zachary Rollins, who is basically looking for a book within his library. He comes across this mysterious book which basically has details of his own life within there, and in an attempt to try and unravel the mystery of why that's happened, he ends up getting involved in a secret society that has a hidden library deep underground, and it's a whole host of mysterious scenarios from there. And as I say, you will be a little bit confused in this one about where the plot is going, but definitely think it's worth it, and by the end, when things start to click into place, it definitely makes more sense. And yeah, I just thought this was a really beautiful read, and definitely one I think everyone should pick up if you liked When the Moon Hatched, because the writing style would be quite comparable to that one. So next up is This Woven Kingdom. So this is by Tahira Mafi, who also wrote the Shatter Me series. I've seen quite a lot of people pick this one up recently and really enjoying kind of the rich Persian mythology that is within here and the folklore that we don't tend to see a lot within our fantasy reads, as a lot of the reads that we have are based on more Western folklore and culture. So this was quite refreshing to read because it is different to what we're kind of used to seeing. In this one we follow Eliza, who is essentially the heir to a Jinn kingdom, but she's in hiding because the Jinn have been kind of classified as second-class citizens within this world and have been in hiding for quite some time. So anyone who does have Jinn descent will be in hiding until one day she meets the Crown Prince Cameron of this land, and they do have quite an instant attraction to each other. It's not quite insta love, but there is definitely an attraction there when they first meet. And basically this one is a story of clashing kingdoms, a forbidden romance, and two people on a journey to try and save their kingdoms respectively, maybe without quite knowing who the other one is. And yeah, I just really love this one, as I say, because of the rich folklore and just a different perspective in terms of that than we usually get within these stories. I think one that I would say is quite similar to this, it's quite different folklore, but one that is similar to this one would be City of Brass, which is part of the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. So this one, I don't believe it's Persian folklore. This one is set in Egypt, but it does have that Jinn folklore within there and centred around that as the main narrative. And in this one we're following Nari, who is a bit of a con artist and a thief within this town, and it's just about getting by when one day she unwittingly releases a Jinn from a lamp, and this kind of opens up a whole host of discoveries to do with jinns, spirits and hidden cities within the swirling sands of the desert. And again, this one I just thought was really rich in terms of that folklore and world building, not something that I've seen in many of the fantasy books that I've read. And I have only read the first two books within this series, and I do need to reread them because it's been quite some time, but I do just remember really appreciating how rich the world was within here and how interesting it was to read. And I do think that even though it's quite a different story, I think This Woven Kingdom is much more romance forward than this one, but if you did like kind of the folklore and the vibes, vibes of this Woven Kingdom, I think you'll enjoy this as well because it has a similar feel to it. Even though it is slightly different folklore, it's definitely still within that same realm. So I do think that the two would be comparable if you like that side of things. Then next up we have We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal, and this one again, it's not quite the same folklore. I believe this is more Arab folklore and history, but it does have kind of a similar feel in terms of that really rich world building, and there is also an element in here of a little bit of forbidden romance as well. But in this one we follow Safira, who is a hunter who is forced to disguise herself as a man because women within this world are not allowed to hunt, but she risks everything so that she can provide for her people. We also follow Nasir, who is the crown prince of this land and is also an assassin for his father and is quite revered by everyone within this land. They both end up going on a mission to try and revive magic within the world as it has been lost for quite some time. This brings their paths together and they end up reluctantly allying together to do this, but they definitely don't trust each other as their journey embarks, and the story kind of goes from there. Now with this one I have only read the first book, I do still need to read the sequel, but again it just gave me that same kind of feel that I got with this Woven Kingdom and City of Brass, where it's really rich in that folklore and history, and the writing style was really beautiful in this one as well. I don't know if I mentioned it with the other two, but the writing styles are quite lyrical and poetic as well, so I think that's why it gave me quite similar vibes. So I do think if you liked either of those two, this one's definitely worth checking out as well because it does have that same richness and lyrical writing. And yeah, so far I just really enjoyed this one. So next up is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This one is a dark academia and we follow our main character Alex Stern, who is a bit of a troubled youth. She's had a bit of a troubled past and she would be the most unlikely person to be at Yale as a freshman. However, she finds herself there, but as part of a trade to get her within Yale, she is asked to infiltrate and monitor some of the mysterious activities of the secret societies within Yale, basically to uncover any secrets that there may be connected with the death of a girl recently on campus. Now obviously this is a dark academia, so there is quite evil forces at play, and as she tries to investigate this, more and more things are endangering her life, and the story kind of goes from there. This definitely gave really great dark academia vibes, as it has the secret societies, and I just think the setting that Leigh Bardugo set up in here was really atmospheric. And yeah, really enjoyed this one. So if you haven't read this one yet, definitely pick this one up if you're a fan of dark academia. But one that I think is quite comparable to that one is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and this is the Scholomance series that she's written. And this one we follow Elle Higgins, who is a young girl who is quite standoffish. She doesn't really have many friends, but she has to go to the Scholomance to complete 3 years worth of training so that she can survive. And basically within this Scholomance, it's 3 years of essentially trials within here. In terms of what they study, it is quite ominous and it is quite vague as you go along, but essentially there are 3 levels within the Scholomance, and as you progress each year you go lower and lower into the Scholomance, and the trials and tests get much harder. There are no teachers here, you're kind of magically given your homework and things like that, but there are definitely dark forces at play, and it is essentially a deadly education. There is a high chance of you not surviving throughout your time at the Scholomance. And again in this one I just thought the atmosphere was really dark and really fit the tone of dark academia. I really love the characters within here. I think the main character was quite comparable to Alex Stern within Leigh Bardugo's Ninth House, in that she was kind of quite independent. She just wanted to do things on her own. She doesn't really want to take help from anyone, but as the story goes along she may discover that it's not such a bad idea. And yeah, again I just think this is a series that doesn't really get a lot of mention or a lot of hype on BookTube or bookstagram or anything like that, but one I really enjoyed. And if you like anything that's set in a school setting, I definitely think you'd enjoy this one. So yeah, if you haven't checked this one out and you're a fan of dark academia or anything that has kind of a magical school setting, definitely check this one out. And I think Naomi Novik's writing is really beautiful as well, so yet again just another reason to pick this one up. Next up we've got The Crimson Moth by Crescent City, and it's called The Heartless Hunter in the US I believe. But in this one we follow a witch and a witch hunter whose lives are kind of intertwined as this story goes along. So it starts off with Rune, who is a witch who is pretending to be nothing more than a socialite and kind of a flirtatious young girl looking for someone to marry within this land, as essentially witches have been outlawed following a revolution within the town. However, Rune is also working to try and save as many witches within this land as possible and get them passage out so that they can escape the hands of the witch hunter within this town. And the head of the witch hunters is Gideon, and Rune decides to kind of almost fake date him to try and get information from him to help her save the witches within this town. And this one was a really fun read, quite fast paced. I really enjoyed the character development in here, kind of the fake dating element on both sides, because Gideon does also suspect Rune within this one, and they both kind of decide to fake date each other without the other knowing. But it was quite an interesting dynamic and quite a fun dynamic, and I think this is replicated when you look at Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahoran. Now I think this one was out before this, I don't think it's a copy and paste or anything, but it is quite a similar premise with this one, where we follow our main character Lou, who is a witch, but she has kind of been hiding her witch powers for quite some time, witches aren't allowed within this town, as if you're a witch within this town you will be killed by what are called the chasseurs. So they're basically witch hunters. They're kind of portrayed as being quite religious and pious. So Lou has kind of separated herself from her witch's coven and has just been hiding in plain sight essentially and living a normal life. Lou ends up meeting Reed Diggory, who is one of the head chasseurs within this town. They end up getting found in a bit of a compromising position within Reed's room, and they have to pretend that they are engaged to be married to kind of upkeep Reed's reputation. Now Reed doesn't know that she's a witch, so he's happy to go along with this under that premise, and basically it's just following them along as this unfolds, as there may be some mysteries to unfold there as well. And I really enjoyed this trilogy. It's one again that I don't think gets enough hype, and if you did like the Crimson Moth, I do think you'd like this one as well, because the dynamic between the two main characters is quite similar. But there is a good bit of plot in the background to keep you entertained, so it's not just about the romance within this one as well. And yeah, I just always think when I was reading this one, this is definitely one that was coming up in my mind. It's quite a similar premise and quite a similar story, so if you did enjoy the Crimson Moth, definitely pick up Serpent and Dove, because I think you'll really enjoy it. Next up is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. So again, this is one that's kind of almost like a booktube BookTok darling. A lot of people really love this and also love the kind of companion series Once Upon a Broken Heart. This one is quite fairy tale-esque, and it follows two sisters who have had quite an abusive and neglectful upbringing. There is a carnival called Caraval that comes to town every once in however many years, and Scarlett, who is the main character in this first book, has been writing to Caraval to try and get a ticket to go, basically for her whole life. They manage to get a ticket to go and make the voyage to go there, only as soon as they get there, Scarlett's sister Tella ends up going missing. So Scarlett has to go on a mission to try and figure out what's happened to her sister and to try and find her to save her. And this one is just very whimsical, very fun, very, as I say, fairy tale-esque. It does have a bit of a darker side to it as well, but definitely gives you kind of those fairy tale vibes. And one that I think is quite comparable to this one and is quite hyped up, and you probably will have heard of it, but one that I do think is comparable would be Belladonna by Adele and Grace. And this one again isn't quite fairy tale-esque. I would say this is much more of a gothic vibe, but it's almost like a gothic fairy tale for me. That's kind of how I felt about it. And in this one we follow Signa, who has been orphaned from she was quite a young child and has been raised by a string of guardians within her family for her entire life. And most of her guardians haven't been best for her, and a lot of them have come to untimely ends, and a lot of the time they were just looking after her because she is set to inherit quite a large amount of money when she turns 18. She ends up coming to Thorn Grove to live with her relatives, the Hawthorns, who are basically her last living relatives. When she's there, the family are partying quite a lot, and a lot of this is to do with the matriarch, who has recently passed away, and they're just kind of trying to deal with that grief. Now Signa ends up actually meeting the ghost of the matriarch there, who tells her that it was someone within her own family who caused her death. So Signa kind of sets out on this mission to find out who the culprit was, and also to try and save her cousin Blythe, who is now suffering from a similar sickness to her mother. With this one we do have Death, who is a physical character within this, and he is actually the love interest as well. So yeah, with this one I just thought it was quite whimsical as well, even though it does have that more gothic side of it. It's set in a Regency era time, so it definitely gives you those fairy tale vibes, and I think if you like the vibes of Caraval, you'll probably like this one as well, because they are quite similar. And then last up I have A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, and now the one I'm going to link to this is a bit of a tenuous link, but I'll explain why I'm linking it when we get there. But basically this one we follow our main character Freya, who is in a very unhappy marriage and in quite an abusive marriage at the start of this story, and she's been dreaming of trying to escape from him for quite some time. Her dreams do become a reality when her husband trades her to the region's Jarl in an attempt to have her fight his son, which will only end in one of their deaths. In order to survive, she is forced to reveal her biggest secret, that she actually possesses a drop of the goddess's blood, which basically gives her the power to repel any attack that comes toward her. And this magic is one that was foretold would unite the nation, and so the Jarl takes her, as whoever has her in their possession will be able to rule the land, as was foretold in a prophecy years ago. So she ends up kind of being under this Jarl's command. They go on a bit of a journey to bring her to their kingdom, and the story kind of goes from there. Now there is only one book out in this series so far, but the reason I'm linking this to the next series is that it has quite a lot of Nordic folklore and Norse mythology within here, as does the Broken Kingdom series by L.J. Andrews. So a lot of it is based on Norse mythology, and you will see a lot in there that is influenced by that. And it also is a bit of a romantasy, the same as A Fate Inked in Blood. So the Broken Kingdom series starts with A Curse of Shadows and Thorns, and the first book follows our main protagonist Elise, who is basically a princess within this land and has lived her whole life doing her duty for the kingdom. And as part of that duty, she is set to marry someone from a neighbouring kingdom to help strengthen the ties between the two lands. She is setting off to do this, and as part of that she has a negotiator with her called Legion Grey, and let's just say he begins to show her how things that she may be believing in aren't quite true, through, and she may uncover some secret plans that Legion had along the way, and she has to decide whether she will help him with his plans or return back and be on the side of her uncle within her own land. Now this one, I would say again, is very much romance heavy. It has quite a simplistic world building and magic system, but a lot of the world building and magic system is taken from Norse mythology. It is quite a long series. I think there's around 8 or 9 books within it. I've read all of them, so I did really enjoy them, and it is a series that's comprised of almost 3 trilogies, so 3 books will follow one couple, the next books will follow another couple, and then the last few books kind of wrap it up with another couple and kind of a compilation book at the end. So it does keep it fresh, it doesn't get too tiresome or anything, because it's not the same group of people that you're following for all 9 books. But as I say, a lot of it is inspired by Norse mythology, so if you like that element of A Fate Inked in Blood, I think you'll really like this series. And it is tied to The Ever King, which has just come out, and a lot of people are talking about and a lot of people are reading, but some of the characters that are in this series do pop up within that series as well. It's not quite a prequel, it's just kind of connected within the same land, and it does give you quite a lot of history, which I'd imagine will give quite good context to The Ever King. I haven't read that yet, but I've heard it's really good, so I'm excited to read that, knowing that I really enjoyed this series as well. So that's everything. I hope you got a few suggestions in there. I think that was quite a long list that we went through. Some of them you probably will have heard of, but I'm hoping there were a few in there that you may not have heard of before and you may not be interested in picking up. They're all books that I've really enjoyed, so could honestly recommend any of them. Let me know if you have any suggestions for the books that I've mentioned in here, if you think there's any books that I've missed off or any books that you think are comparable to some of the books that I mentioned. As I say, these are all books that I've really enjoyed, so if there are some books that you think I should be picking up because of my enjoyment of these, definitely put those in the comments below. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I'm posting 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so book recommendations, book shopping, book hauls, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!